Picking up a pen that lay on the table, she wrote on a piece of paper, "Be careful. The police are coming." She showed Marius her work, and then, changing the subject quickly for no reason at all, she gazed into his eyes and said shyly, "Do you know, Monsieur Marius, that you're a very handsome boy?" Approaching him, she rested a cold red hand on his shoulder and said, "You never notice me, Monsieur Marius, but I know you. I see you on the stairs, and I see you walking around the streets looking so sad and alone." Marius's cheeks went red. He moved away from the girl's touch and said, "I think, mademoiselle, that I have something belonging to you." He handed her the parcel of letters. She clapped her hands and cried, "We've been looking for that everywhere. How did you know they were mine? Of course, the handwriting. You were the man we ran into last night." While she talked excitedly, she took out one of the letters. "Ah, this is for the old man who goes to church every day. If I hurry, I might be able to catch him. Perhaps he'll give me enough for a dinner. We haven't eaten for 3 days." Marius took a 5-franc piece from his pocket and handed it to the girl. "The sun's come out at last," she cried, eagerly accepting the coin. "That's enough food for 2 days. You're a real gentleman, monsieur." With those words, she gave a little laugh and wave, grabbed some dry bread from the table, and disappeared out of the door. Marius had lived for 5 years without much money, but he had never been really poor. Now, after his conversation with the girl from the next room, he understood what real poverty was. Only a thin wall separated him from the family of lost souls in the room next door. He had heard them and seen them, but had paid them no attention, and he suddenly felt guilty. If they had had another neighbour, he thought, one who had noticed their suffering, perhaps they could have been rescued by now. As Marius was thinking about the sad life of the family in the next room, he stared dreamily at the wall that separated them. Then, in the top corner near the ceiling, Marius saw that there was a triangular hole. "Let's see what these people are really like," Marius thought. "Then I'll be in a better position to help them." He stood on a cupboard, put his eye to the hole, and looked through it into his neighbour's room. The Jondrettes' room was dirty and evil-smelling, unlike Marius's bare but clean room. Its only furniture was a chair, an old table, some cracked dishes, and 2 dirty beds, one on each side of a fireplace. A man with a long grey beard was sitting at the table, writing a letter and smoking a pipe. A large woman with greying hair, once red, was sitting by the fire, while a thin, pale-faced child sat on one of the beds. Marius, depressed at what he saw, was going to get down from the cupboard when the door of the Jondrettes' room opened, and the elder girl came in. Slamming the door shut behind her, she cried victoriously, "He's coming!" "Who's coming?" Her father looked up. "The old man who goes to church. He's following me. I saw him with his daughter in the church and gave him the letter. He said he would follow me here. I ran ahead to tell you he'll be here in 2 minutes." "You're a good girl," the man said, rising quickly to his feet. Then turning to his wife, he said, "Quickly, put out the fire." While she poured water on the flames, the man broke the chair with his foot and told his younger daughter to break a window. She put her fist through the glass and ran to her bed, crying because her arm was covered in blood. "Excellent!" Her father smiled, tearing a piece off his shirt and using it as a bandage. "Now we're ready for the kind gentleman. When he sees how miserable we are, he'll give us a lot of money, you'll see." Moments later, there was a gentle knock on the door. Jondrette rushed to open it, bowing almost to the ground as he did so.
"Please come in, my dear sir. Please enter with your charming young lady."
An elderly man and a young girl appeared in the doorway, and Marius, still looking through the hole in the wall, could not believe his eyes. It was she. She. Everyone who has ever loved will feel the force of that small word. In the bright mist that clouded his vision, Marius could hardly see the features of the sweet face that had lit his life for 6 months and had then disappeared, filling his life with darkness. And now the vision had reappeared. When Marius had recovered some of his senses, he saw that she seemed a little paler than before. Her companion, as usual, was Monsieur Leblanc. As she entered the room, she put a large parcel on the table.
"Monsieur, you will find some woolen stockings and blankets in the parcel," Monsieur Leblanc told Jondrette. "You are extremely generous, monsieur," Jondrette said again, bowing to the ground. "But, as you can see, we are unfortunate in many ways. We are without food, monsieur, and without heating. No warmth for my unhappy children. Our only chair is broken, a broken window in this weather. My wife ill in bed, and our younger daughter injured."
"Oh, the poor child," Ursula said, seeing the girl's bleeding wrist.
"She had an accident in the machine shop where she works for 6 sous an hour," Jondrette explained. "They may have to cut off her arm."
The daughter, taking her father's words seriously, began to scream with fear. While Monsieur Leblanc and Ursula tried to comfort her, Jondrette approached his wife and said in a whisper,
"Take a good look at that man."
He then returned to Monsieur Leblanc and told him about his debts.
"I owe 60 francs in rent," he said.
Monsieur Leblanc took a coin out of his pocket and put it on the table. 5 francs is all I have with me," he said, "but I'll take my daughter home and come back this evening with more money for you." Jondrette accompanied Monsieur Leblanc and Ursula out of the door, and after a few minutes' indecision, Marius jumped down from the cupboard and ran out into the street. But he was too late. Their carriage had already gone. Miserably, he turned back to the house. He went into his room, pushing the door behind him. But the door would not shut. Turning, Marius saw that a hand was holding it open. "What is it?" he demanded. It was the Jondrette girl. "So it's you again," he said almost fiercely. "What do you want now?" She did not reply, but stood thoughtfully looking at him, seeming to have lost all her earlier confidence. She had not entered the room, but was still standing in the half-light of the corridor. "What do you want?" Marius repeated angrily. "Monsieur Marius," she said at last, a faint light in her sad eyes. "You seem upset. What's the matter?" "Nothing. Now, please leave me alone." Marius tried again to shut the door, but she still held it open. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You aren't rich, but you were generous this morning. You've been kind to us. Now I want to be kind to you. Is there anything that I can do?" Marius considered her offer, then had an idea. Moving closer to her, he said, "Do you know the address of those people who've just left your room?" "No." "Can you find out for me?" "Is that what you want?" she said, a disappointed look on her face. "Yes." The girl looked hard at him for a minute. "What will you give me?" she said at last. "Anything you want." "Anything?" "Yes." "Then I'll get it." She left immediately, closing the door behind her. Marius sat down and buried his face in his hands, too overcome by emotion to think clearly. But then he heard a loud voice from the next room.
I tell you I'm sure. Jondrette was speaking to his wife. I recognised him.
Without another thought, Marius jumped onto the cupboard and looked again through the hole in the wall. Really? His wife looked puzzled. Are you sure?
Of course I'm sure. It's been 8 years, but I recognised him at once.
He told the two girls to leave the room, and then, when alone with his wife, he said,
And I recognise the girl too. I'm surprised you didn't.
Why should I? I've never seen her. But Jondrette bent down and whispered something in her ear. Straightening up, he said,
Now do you recognise her?
Her? Said the woman, her voice filled with sudden hatred.
Are you sure? That's impossible, she cried. Our daughter's barefoot and without a dress between them, while she wears leather boots and a fur coat. You must be wrong. You've forgotten that child was ugly, and this one's not bad-looking. I tell you it's the same girl. You'll see. And I'll tell you another thing. She's going to make us a fortune. I'm tired of being poor. We deserve a better life, and this is our chance.
What do you mean?
He said he'll be here at 6 o'clock with 60 francs. I'll bring some friends round, and we'll make sure he gives us a lot more money.
What will you do if he doesn't give you more money? Jondrette stroked his beard and laughed.
We'll know what to do about it.
And then, as he was going to leave the room, he turned to his wife and said,
You know, it's lucky he didn't recognise me. If he had, he wouldn't be coming back here again. It's the beard that saved me. My lovely, long, romantic beard.
With an ugly laugh, he pulled his cap down over his eyes and left the room. Although Marius was a dreamer and not a man of action, he knew immediately that he had to save Monsieur Leblanc and Ursula from the trap that Jondrette was setting for them. But what could he do? He could not warn Monsieur Leblanc because he did not know the old man's address. There was only one thing to do. He had to tell the police. Half an hour later, Marius was at the nearest police station. The desk clerk showed him into the police chief's office, where a tall man with a wide face and a thin, tight mouth was trying to keep warm next to a fire. "Are you the chief of police?" Marius asked.
"He's away," the tall man said. "I'm Inspector Javert. Now what do you want?"
Marius told Javert about the morning's events. When he told Javert his address, he noticed the inspector's eyes light up with great interest. Then, when everything had been explained, Javert thought for a moment. Finally, he asked Marius for his door key, and told him to go home and hide quietly in his room, so that his neighbours would think he was out.
"Take these with you,"
the inspector went on, producing 2 small guns.
"When the old man and the girl arrive, let them start their business. When you think it's getting dangerous, shoot one of these guns. After that, I'll take charge."
Back in his room, Marius sat down nervously on his bed. It was nearly 6 o'clock. Outside, it had stopped snowing, and a full moon was growing steadily brighter above the mist. Suddenly he heard voices. Taking off his boots, he quietly climbed onto the cupboard and looked through the hole in the wall. A fire burned in the corner of the room, filling it with blood-red light. Jondrette, who had just come in, was shaking snow from his shoes.
"Everything's arranged," he said. "Has the concierge gone out?" "Yes," his wife said. "And you're sure he's not in next door?" "Positive." "Good." Then he turned to his daughters. "Now, you two must go and keep guard in the street. One by the gate, one at the street corner."
"A fine job," the elder girl called back. "Keeping guard barefoot in the snow."
"Tomorrow you'll have fur boots," her father called out after her.
A few minutes later, there was nobody in the building except for Marius and the Jondrettes. Marius watched as Jondrette put a metal bar in the fire and inspected a rope ladder on the table. Next, he opened a drawer, took out a long knife, and tested its blade with his finger. Suddenly, at exactly 6 o'clock, the door into the Jondrettes' room opened.
"Welcome, monsieur,"
Jondrette said, rising to his feet. Monsieur Leblanc appeared, and put 4 coins on the table.
"That is for your rent and food, monsieur," he said. "Now, we must discuss what else is needed."
Jondrette quietly told his wife to dismiss the carriage, and when she had left the room, turned back to his visitor.
"How is the wounded child?"
Monsieur Leblanc asked him.
"Not well," Jondrette smiled sadly. "She's in great pain. Her sister has taken her to hospital, but they'll be back soon."
The conversation continued politely in this way for several minutes. Monsieur Leblanc asked Jondrette about his circumstances, and Jondrette smiled sadly as he invented lie after lie. Finally, Jondrette picked up a large picture that was leaning against the wall and showed it to Monsieur Leblanc. "What's that?" Monsieur Leblanc said, looking at the badly drawn picture of a soldier in uniform.
"It's a work of art,"
Jondrette informed him.
"I love this picture as much as I love my 2 daughters, but unfortunately I have to sell it. What do you think it's worth?"
"It's just an old inn sign. It's worth about 3 francs.
"I'll accept 1,000.
Jondrette softly replied. Monsieur Leblanc rose, and standing with his back to the wall, looked quickly round the room. Jondrette was on his left. His wife was standing on his right near the door. Jondrette put the picture down and stepped quietly towards the old man.
"You don't recognize me, do you?"
he said in a loud, clear voice. At this signal, which he had prearranged with his friends, 3 men, armed with metal poles, rushed into the room. Monsieur Leblanc grew pale, and gripped the back of the broken chair with his huge hands. Marius, meanwhile, raised his right hand with the gun, ready to fire the warning shot.
"The carriage is ready?"
Jondrette asked the 3 men.
"Yes, with 2 good horses,"
one of them replied.
"Excellent."
He turned to Monsieur Leblanc and repeated his earlier question. "You still don't recognize me, do you?"
"No."
"My name isn't Jondrette. It's Thénardier. Now do you recognize me?" Monsieur Leblanc trembled slightly, but still shook his head. Marius, however, who had been going to fire the gun as a signal for the police to arrive, shook so much that he almost fell off the cupboard. "Thénardier," he thought. "That's the name of the man who saved my father's life at the Battle of Waterloo. The man I've promised to help." If he fired the warning shot, Monsieur Leblanc would be saved and Thénardier would be destroyed. But he would also have broken his promise to his father. He felt his knees grow weak. What should he do? Thénardier walked up and down in front of Monsieur Leblanc. "Do you remember the little inn in Montfermeil 8 years ago? You took away our Cosette, do you remember? Wearing that old yellow coat, pretending you were a tramp. Well, now you're going to learn that you can't make things right by just bringing a few hospital blankets. You're the cause of all my troubles. For 1,500 francs, you took away a girl who was bringing me lots of money." "I don't know what you're talking about," Monsieur Leblanc said. "I don't know who you are, but I know what you are. You're a dirty criminal." "A criminal?" Thénardier said, suddenly angry. "That's what you rich people call people like me, isn't it? Just because I failed in business. I was a war hero, you know. I saved an officer's life at Waterloo, and you call me a criminal? Well, I'm going to teach you a lesson." He began to move towards Monsieur Leblanc, but the old man was too quick for him. With surprising speed, He pushed the table and chair to one side and ran to the window. He managed to open it, but before he could jump, the 3 men jumped on him and held him to the floor. This was too much for Marius. "Forgive me, father," he murmured, preparing to fire the gun. But suddenly Thénardier cried, "Don't hurt him!" After a long fight, Monsieur Leblanc was tied up and taken to the bed. "No wallet?" Thénardier cried, having searched his pockets. "Never mind." He sat on the bed next to the helpless but brave old man and said, "Let's discuss things quietly. All I'm asking for is 200,000 francs. I realise that you don't have the money with you now, but I want you to write a letter. I'll tell you what to say." He untied Monsieur Leblanc's right hand and, producing a pen and paper, began, "My dearest daughter, you must come at once. I need you urgently. The person who gives you this note will bring you to me. I shall be waiting." Monsieur Leblanc signed his name Urbain Fabre, which seemed to satisfy Thénardier, and wrote an address on the envelope. Thénardier then took the letter and gave it to his wife. "There's a carriage outside. Don't be long." Nearly half an hour passed. Thénardier seemed lost in his own dark thoughts. The prisoner did not move. Finally, there was the sound of horses in the street outside, and moments later the door to the room was thrown open. "It's a false address!" Madame Thénardier cried. "There's no Urbain Fabre. The old man's been lying to us." Thénardier sat on the corner of the table in silence for some moments, swinging his leg and gazing with a fierce satisfaction at the fire. Then he turned to the prisoner and said in a slow, threatening voice, "What did you hope to gain by giving me a false name and address?" "Time!" cried the prisoner in a loud voice, jumping from the bed, having secretly cut the ropes that tied him. Before the others in the room could react, Monsieur Leblanc was standing by the fire, holding a metal bar above his head. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, "but neither should you fear me." With those words he threw the metal bar out of the window into the street below. "Get him!" Thénardier shouted. "He's defenceless!" 2 men grabbed him by the shoulders. "Now cut his throat!" Thénardier called. Marius stared, frozen with fear, as Thénardier, knife in hand, stood hesitating a few steps away from the prisoner. The brave man was in terrible danger, but Marius still could not fire the gun. Then, in the moonlight, he saw the solution to his problem. On top of the cupboard by his feet, he noticed the piece of paper that the elder daughter had written on. "Be careful, the police are coming." He immediately saw what he had to do. He took a piece of brick from the wall, wrapped the piece of paper around it, and threw it through the hole into the middle of Thénardier's room. He was just in time. Thénardier was advancing towards his prisoner, knife in hand, when his wife cried, "Something fell!" She picked up the piece of paper and handed it to her husband, who read it quickly. "It's Éponine's handwriting," he cried a moment later. "Quick! Get the ladder! The police are coming and we've got to go!" They threw the rope ladder from the open window, but before they could escape, the door opened and Inspector Javert walked in. "Relax," he smiled. "You can't escape through the window. There are 5 of you and 15 of us. You have no chance. Why not come quietly?" The men put down their weapons and surrendered without a fight. When everybody had been arrested and taken from the room, Javert noticed the prisoner, who was standing, head bowed, by the window. He turned to speak to another policeman, but when he looked back, he saw that the prisoner had gone. Javert rushed to the open window and looked down. The rope ladder was swinging gently above the empty street. "He must have been the cleverest of them all," Javert murmured angrily to himself. Chapter 7. The Jondrettes. Summer and autumn passed, and winter came. But Marius saw no sign of Monsieur Leblanc or Ursula. He searched everywhere for them, but without success. He became like a homeless dog, wandering the streets in a mood of dark despair. Without Ursula, his life had become meaningless. Work disgusted him. Walking tired him. Solitude bored him. "If only I hadn't followed them home," he told himself. "It gave me so much happiness just to look at her, and now through my stupidity I've lost even that." Enjolras and his other friends tried to cheer him up by taking him to exciting places, but these expeditions always ended in the same way. Marius would leave the group and walk around the streets of Paris unhappily on his own. One cold but sunny afternoon in February, Marius was walking along the street when two young girls, dressed in rags, ran into him. One was tall and thin, the other smaller. From what they were shouting at each other, he understood that they were running from the police. He stood for a moment staring after them as they disappeared round a corner. Then he noticed a small parcel of papers lying on the ground. Realizing that one of the girls must have dropped it, he picked it up and called after them. But it was too late. The girls had already disappeared from sight. With a sigh, he put the package in his pocket and went on to dinner. That night, at home, Marius opened the package and found that it contained 4 letters, all addressed to different people, and smelling strongly of cheap tobacco. Marius read the 4 letters, and discovered that they were all asking for money. However, there was something strange about them. Although they all seemed to be written by different people, they were written on the same rough paper, in the same handwriting. He also noticed that each of them had similar spelling mistakes. Thinking no more about it, he wrapped the letters up again, threw them into a corner, and went to bed. The next morning, while he was working, there was a gentle knock on his door. "Come in," Marius said, expecting it to be the concierge, Madame Bougon. But the voice that answered, saying, "I beg your pardon, monsieur," was not that of Madame Bougon. It was more like the voice of a sick old man. Marius looked up quickly, and saw that his visitor was a thin girl, wearing just a skirt and shirt. She looked cold and ill, and when she spoke, Marius saw that she had lost several of her teeth. There was, however, still a trace of beauty in the 16-year-old face, like pale sunlight beneath the thick clouds of a winter's dawn. Marius rose to his feet, sure that he had seen the girl somewhere before. "What can I do for you, mademoiselle?" he asked. "I've got a letter for you, Monsieur Marius." Marius opened the letter and read, "My warm-hearted neighbour, I have heard of how you kindly paid my rent for me 6 months ago. I thank you for it. But my eldest daughter will tell you that my wife is sick, and none of us have had any food for 4 days. Please, monsieur, show us the kindness of your generous heart again. My daughter is at your service. Yours truly, Jondrette." Marius realized at once that the handwriting, the yellow paper, and the smell of cheap tobacco was the same as in the 4 letters he had read the previous evening. He now had 5 letters, all the work of one author, the man who lived with his family in the next room. The Jondrette family had been Marius's neighbours for many months, but he had never before paid much attention to them. This was why he had failed to recognize the two daughters when they had run into him on the street. But now he understood that Jondrette's business was writing dishonest letters, asking for money from people he imagined were wealthier than himself. Marius looked up from the letter and watched the girl moving fearlessly around his room, studying the furniture and the mirror on the wall. Her eyes lit up when she noticed the books on his writing desk. "Books," she said, and then added with pride, "I know how to read and write. Look, I'll show you."